All right, so last class, I asked you to look into price theory. You looked at the David Friedman video on price theory, about 15 minutes long. And then you read Hayek's 1945 Use of Knowledge in Society. And so here's the American Economic Review 100th anniversary edition, 2011, 100 years of the American Economic Review, the 20 most influential articles of the first 100 years of the American Economic Association. Hayek's paper is in there. It's the only one without mathematics.
You said it's without mathematics?
Yes, the only one without mathematics in the first 100 years of the American Economic Review. So the main point behind the exercise was to discover and understand that the impossibility of central planning, because, and we've looked at stages of production, it's impossible for any single person or committee to understand more because knowledge is dispersed and local, and people act at a local and dispersed level. It's impossible for central planning to occur. Even though Team Blue now, if you read their playbook, they want to federalize just about every human activity, as does Team Red in certain ways. So the idea behind the price theory exercise and understanding is that knowledge and human action is dispersed and local, and therefore the impossibility of central planning. And it's not really a price system, it's a price theory, because a system assumes something that's closed. A system can't explain increasing returns to scale like the price theory can. If you don't believe me that central planning doesn't work, just ask the 20 million Ukrainians who died when Stalin collectivized farms, or ask the people involved in the new economic plan in the 1930s. So the whole idea of Hayek's Use of Knowledge in Society project was based on a critique of socialism at the time. So we start out with the perfect competition model, where then it emerges through supply and demand and voluntary exchange. You emerge with an optimal price and optimal quantity, and that's the price signal. And so that price then guides behavior. And then that also means that you maximize producer surplus and consumer surplus is maximized, meaning economic well-being is maximized through the decentralized pricing through market behavior. And then, so some people wrote that emphasized that it's a coordination of plans, right? The future is unknown and unknowable. People make plans and then they coordinate those plans. And that's what moves you towards equilibrium, is the coordination of plans. And because you have the infinite regress at the beginning of time, all of the incremental changes that have allowed us to have the smartphone, you can't go back in time and recreate that. I mean, it would be impossible for any one person to do, or any committee to do. So it's about a market discovery and awareness. As your market discovery, as you're determining the best way to realize your goals, your ends, it's a market discovery process, which is guided through cooperation and the price signal. And somebody wrote, and this was interesting. So when you don't have this price signal working, you end up with Hayek's main point in that paper that no one picked out. Hayek's main point is that when you interfere in the price signal, it leads to social crisis. So examples are the minimum wage leads to unemployment for those worse off, rent control creates a shortage of housing and more people sleeping on the subway. Then you have regulatory capture theory, bad bond ratings, assigning ourselves over to experts. The expert problem or the knowledge problem. When you start assigning your agency over to experts, then you lose your agency and you get social crisis. What were you going to say, Rachel? Oh, yeah. Subsidies definitely are a distortion of the price signal. Yeah. So I did a formal definition of the Hayekian knowledge problem. So here's the formal definition of the knowledge problem. People make local decentralized People make local decentralized decisions based on local knowledge which is unknown and unknowable by a central planner. Thus, when the central planner intervenes, this can lead to social crisis. And that's Hayek's main point in the use of knowledge in society. And these intervention effects can either be intended or unintended. Perhaps, right, so subsidies, you give the world's richest person subsidies to locate a second office in your neighborhood. You see the quote unquote jobs created, but you don't see the taxes, additional taxes that everyone else has to pay. To provide the common good. See, what else did I want to say about that? So a lot of, so you have the expert problem. And a lot of this, a student wrote about, there's a difference between micro and macro. And this gets to the crux of the expert problem, is that there really is no difference between micro and macro. Macro only came around in 1936 with Keynes's book. And Keynes's book creates a role for the expert for monetary and fiscal policy. So we've had that since 103 years of the central bank and 80 years of the welfare state. And in 1945, there was an act of Congress that made the federal government responsible for full employment, which then opened the door for fiscal policy. So we now get into this paternalistic culture where we now depend upon experts to guide the economy. And we know from the Hayekian knowledge problem that, and we saw the Hardfire TV show, The Problem with Macroeconomics, that this expert reliance actually creates more problems than it helps. So the difference between micro and macro is a recent phenomenon which has created experts, which has removed a lot of individual agency and helps create the politicization of society. So, right. So the importance of factor mobility, again, part of the price theory, more easy that the factors of production are able to go from one place to another, the more surplus is created, the more standards of living are increased, the greater the decrease in absolute poverty.
So what's the alternative?
What's that?
So the alternative to the expert process.
Yeah, would be local. Yes, would be supply side economics. Yes.
What if there was like a knowledge compared to the expert?
Good. We're gonna talk about Smith's virtuous circle. I wanted to add that, and that relates to specialization of labor. A lot of people, when writing about the assignment, just use specialization of labor as a starting point without realizing it. I don't know if I don't get to what you inquired about by the time we're done with this, ask again or comment again. So now we're going to look at Smith's virtuous circle, which relates to price theory. So this is Adam Smith's virtuous circle, where the invisible hand, the free market, rises all tides, where the common good would be a negative rights rule of law. So this would be increasing wealth. And so for Smith, you start at specialization of labor as the starting point. And it's interesting to note that the specialization of labor is also the start of alienation, where prior to capitalism and the decentralized price system, quote unquote, people were responsible from the beginning to the end of their own reproduction. But when you start to get specialization of labor and trade and the market, then you lose sight of the big picture because it's impossible to have the big picture. And so that's why then you get this reliance on experts and team blue versus team red solving everybody's problems, because specialization of labor means that you live in a complex society. And it's hard to put complex societies with unknown and unknowable futures into mathematics. And therefore, it's hard to get those types of ideas published in the American Economic Review. And to become the central bank president, you have to do that. So you start with specialization of labor, and then that leads to trade, or what Smith calls the extent of the market. The greater the extent of the market, the greater the wealth creation. Again, factor mobility in the price system. So specialization of labor leads to trade, which then leads to capital, which leads to profit and capital accumulation. And then this profit and capital accumulation then leads to investment in labor-saving devices. All investment is some form of robotics. And then this then leads to greater specialization of labor. And then the virtuous circle of increasing wealth, all done through the invisible hand of local and decentralized knowledge and decision-making, and cannot be guided by anybody. Any comments on that? So I guess that's all I wanted to say about price theory. Thank you. Oh, I did. I came up with that when I was putting together my economic history class when I first started teaching.